All right, so excellent. So welcome, Dr. Berg. I want to actually go, and I am super excited. So I have been following you for so long, and I always hear people say, well, ask Dr. Berg or go look at a Dr. Berg video when something shows up. And I could probably sit for 6 hours talking about all your accolades and all your accomplishments. But the one thing that stood out to me when I did some research was 5,000 videos, which is unbelievable, and over 11 million followers on your channel. And that makes you a superstar. And I am really glad to have you on. And what I like to do in this interview is to actually talk a little bit about yourself in a brief summary, and then really get into what I think my patients or the people that look at my channel what they're into, and that's obviously helping their blood sugar levels, losing weight, more energy. And I know you are a guru of keto, so maybe if you want to talk on that a little bit as well. So you're in charge, sir.
I got into this because I personally was sick. I had in my 20s, I had blood sugar issues. I was hypoglycemic, pre-diabetic, arthritis, and I think if I didn't have all these problems, the beginning of gout, kidney stones, chronic fatigue, if I didn't have all these problems, I would never be interested in health at all. So
Yeah.
it forced me to figure things out over a period of time and stumble on things that then now, like, you just want to help everyone with things that helped you. So part of that breakthrough was figuring out what diet is best,
Hmm.
not just for losing the weight, but how to get my energy back, how to really maximize my health. And so right now I'm 58 years old right now, and I'm way healthier now than I was in my 20s, believe it or not. I
Yeah.
was dragging around. So I think that's how I can relate to people, and then help them with real simple things that they can do at home, as well as the core basic things of how to create your health versus wait till a symptom happens and then treat it. So I would always I always try to have people learn from my mistakes rather
Mhm.
than go through and make their own and figure it out. So yeah, that's my brief history.
That's great. Let me ask, you are, in my opinion, I think, and most people who are in healthcare, you're the doctor of keto, like you are the leader in keto. Why don't you just briefly explain keto as if I or someone listening was maybe in the third grade, right? Real simple, because that word for some people it just kind of scares them. They don't not sure exactly what it is. So if you could explain that, that'd be great.
Hey, believe it or not, a lot of medical professionals don't even understand it because keto relates to another word which is called ketoacidosis, and that's a disease type bad thing that happens when you're a type 1 diabetic and you forgot to take your insulin and your blood sugars get out of control and the whole thing. But all you need to know about ketones is ketones are kind of a fuel that is more usable than fat. So your body can burn fat, but it converts it to ketones because they're a lot easier to package and use as energy.
Hmm.
So the two main fuels of the body are glucose and ketones.
Hmm.
And way back in the day, when we didn't have food available, if you think about caveman times, we didn't eat every day, and we didn't eat a lot of sweet things, and so we had to survive. So our bodies, and that's why we have fat.
Yeah.
And maybe there was fruit, but only seasonal. Maybe there was honey, only seasonal, and we would eat that. And the purpose of those things would be to convert to fat in your midsection. And that was basically that's how we survived.
Yeah.
So those people that were overweight back then and now are just very efficient at metabolizing food, and they don't burn fat easily. So everyone's trying to get rid of their fat, but if you think about what fat is, it's a you don't really have slow metabolism. It's an efficient metabolism. So it burns really slow, and so you could survive longer on less food. So with keto, it's all about how do we tap into that fat. Well, what controls that is just your carbohydrates. You must lower your carbohydrates, because if you don't, then your body's just running on that sugar, and then you're hungry all the time, and
Yeah.
then you have to eat every hour and a half, and then you never burn fat.
Yeah.
So in order to burn fat, you have to lower your carbs, and then all that fat that gets burned has to be converted to ketones to be usable. So that's really what ketones are in a thumbnail sketch, and it's the ketone diet is really a low carb diet. It doesn't necessarily talk about you can't get into ketosis if you increase your fat. You get into it by lowering your carbs, and
Yep.
typically you have a moderate amount of protein, and then what's left is a little more fat. But it's not just eating pure fat. And I always recommend the healthy version of that keto diet. So that would be you're not going to McDonald's, which you could actually just have, the burger without the bun, but we want to do the quality foods, the healthier foods on top of a low carb diet. And that's what I recommend as your basic thing. And then parallel to that, if we want to speed things up, we don't want to eat so frequently. So we want to add something called intermittent fasting. So maybe you do 2 meals a day. But what's really cool about that is your appetite goes away. So now it's easier once you kind of convert to burning this fat and making ketones. So you can do it long term because you're not always hungry, you're not always craving. So it's more of a lifestyle change than just you're on a diet for a period of time.
Sure.
But ketones are kind of a super fuel because it helps your brain. You think better. It helps your mood. It helps with inflammation. It's good for the heart. It's extremely healthy to run your body on ketones. Um, on the flip side, if you don't if you don't get into ketosis and you run on glucose, that's very that's where you get into trouble because then you have your blood sugar starts going higher, and the term for that is glucotoxicity. So that's where you have glucose that's toxic.
Yep.
But if you get on this low carb and you do it with healthy foods, a lot of those health foods will protect you against all these side effects from diabetes. So
Yeah.
that's the good news is that we can decrease the complications from diabetes. There's 4 areas of the body that are affected with diabetes, like the eye,
Yep.
the heart and arteries, the brain and nerves, and your kidneys.
Hmm.
So um, combining both the low carb with the quality foods, boy, you can turn this thing around and really support those 4 areas in a major way. So
Yeah, and in
you can
my
get rid of that.
office, I see that every day, right? Because I work with type 2 diabetics. It's not uncommon in my office where I'll see someone headed to an amputation or have an amputation or kidney failure. I see that a couple of times a week in my office. And it's really devastating. I mean, it's like the worst
Yep.
complication. And it's still after doing this I've been doing this for 20 years. It still doesn't feel good after 20 years seeing that someone has gotten worse over time. And one of the things that I do see is that, like you said, all the different organs get affected. Now, I have had patients of mine who, are trying to get their diabetes better and their blood sugar better and so forth. And um, I think they're guessing at how to do keto, right? Because there's certainly strategies and a method to the madness and a real way to do it. But what I've seen, and I'm sure you've experienced this because you've helped thousands and thousands of people, is they're people who do it wrong. And could you talk a little bit about that? Like, what would be some like no-nos or some things that would be the wrong way to do it? Because there's now you go to the store and everything keto friendly and this and that, and you could probably still do that the wrong way. You could start probably eating something keto friendly, but it's not healthy for you per se.
Right. So I think I guess the simplest way to describe the ketogenic diet in the simplest way possible is just meat and vegetables.
Right. Yeah.
Meat
Yeah.
and vegetables,
Exactly.
and get rid of the potatoes and the grains and things like that. But you can have the fattier foods.
Yeah.
Um, the so there's a lot of everyone's jumping on the bandwagon for keto foods. I don't recommend that with all the keto snacks. I'll give you an example. I had a patient who said, "Oh yeah, I tried your ketogenic diet. It didn't work." And then I find out he's doing just these keto cookies, right?
Yeah.
Low carb cookies, but he's eating all day long.
Right.
Like there's no
Yeah.
intermittent fasting. And so honestly, if we take a comparison, a look at just the diet part versus the frequency of how many times you eat. If you're diabetic, you must focus and put attention more on the frequency and not eat so frequent, because here's the data. What we want to do is we want to actually support and heal this hormone insulin, which kind of
Right.
controls everything.
Yep.
And carbs raise insulin, but also eating anything raises insulin. So if you're eating very frequent, you're going to be in trouble. So we want to both focus on that. But if you were just to have a rule of thumb, okay, I'm on low carb now. My appetite's going away. And the rule is don't eat unless you're hungry. Okay, good. You
Right.
wake up in the morning. Are you hungry? No. Okay, don't eat. Ride the wave. Okay, at lunchtime, I'm hungry. Good. Eat. But then really focus on what your body tells you, because very quickly, if you lower your carb, you switch to fat burning and you can go longer without eating.
Yeah.
And so the mistake is to kind of get stuck in this traditional thing. Well, I have to eat because it's dinner time. I'm like, wait a second, are you hungry? No. Ride the wave, go longer. And then
Yeah.
that way you let your body um, tell you when you're ready. Because when you think about the average person that's not even overweight, maybe they have a little, they can survive. They have a person that's actually fairly thin has 100,000 calories of stored energy on their
Yeah.
body to run on.
Yep.
100,000.
Yep.
Um, so that's and then if you take an overweight person, they have a lot more. So you have enough energy. And the thing is, when you get into ketosis, realize this: your body is eating, it's eating your fat.
Yeah.
So that's what it's eating. So it's not that
Yep.
it's starving, it's eating your fat when you're not eating. So it's
Yep.
kind of an interesting concept. The other mistake is, let's say, for example, I'm going to do what's called sort of keto. I'm going to kind of do it low carb,
Right.
but then I'm going to, every third day, I'm going to eat a little something that's sweet, or like a piece of bread or a half a glass of wine. The
Yeah.
problem with that is now we have to wait another 48 to sometimes 72 hours before you can get back into ketosis.
Right. Yeah.
So you may find that it's not working because you're cheating a little bit too frequently.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. You have to stay consistent, I think, right? Like,
yeah, I have to be consistent.
yeah.
And this is why I always do the A1C test, because that measures an average of 3 months of blood sugars.
Yeah.
You could pick up if a person's cheating just by that test, versus just a spot blood test, check
Yeah.
for glucose.
Exactly. One of the challenges I've seen, because in my office I do functional medicine, so I'm running labs, blood tests, saliva tests, right? A lot of testing. I've seen that when sometimes someone's not eating, their cortisol level goes up, their stress hormone. Is there anything that you see that could help that? Whether it be supplement wise or maybe walking more. I don't know how you would approach that in the keto world.
Okay, so are you talking about like they wake up in the morning and they have their sugars is still high, or is that like the dawn phenomena?
Could be like I don't want to confuse anybody, but like in my office, I look at the adrenal stress index. So circadian rhythms, like how the rhythm should be for cortisol levels higher in the morning, and then it gets lower and lower as time goes on. And I see that sometimes when someone's not eating, that their stress hormones come off, and that's probably because they're not actually getting into ketosis, which is probably driving that, right? That's what I'm thinking that is could be the factor there.
So what's interesting about this is that when you get into ketosis and you've adapted after just 3 days of doing this correctly, um, the flight or fight stress mechanism will improve. You're going to be less stressed. Um,
That's
your
good.
body, when you don't eat sugar, when you first don't eat sugar, what happens is you might have this response, this stress response of mobilizing sugar, but that's a normal thing that the adrenals put out cortisol to keep your sugar up in between
Yeah.
meals. It's
Yeah.
not an unhealthy thing at all. It's not going to be stressful at all. It's actually less stress when you get into ketosis, because you balance out that part of the nervous system for sure.
That's awesome. Tell me about your philosophy with supplements, diets. I know that the diet we just spoke about, right, which is I think it's a great philosophy as well as strategy for someone. Tell me about supplements that my audience, they would be more diabetic. And I know you have a number of different supplements you recommend, even having your own inventory. What are some things that you've seen have helped type 2 diabetics? Or,
Well, the two general categories of nutrition that I think everyone should at least introduce when they start this is the electrolytes,
yep,
and then you also have the B vitamins, because the
yes,
demand, when you start burning more fat, the demand for electrolytes and B vitamins goes up. And if
yep,
you're deficient in those, you may, might not feel right. You might have some fatigue, things like that.
yep,
Because a diabetic, once they start to get off the carbs, and think about this too. What is a diabetic? That is someone with higher blood sugar. So
yep,
wouldn't it make sense? Okay, well, I'm going to eat less sugar then, right? Yeah, and carbs. So that's what you're doing. All that sugar actually stores a lot of fluid. So you're going to
yeah,
get rid of the fluid, right? Initially, you're going to probably the first week you can lose a lot. And then with that fluid loss comes a loss of electrolytes like
yeah,
sodium and potassium. So you got
yeah,
to put that back in to feel better. And then the B vitamins are very essential too to keep your energy up. So
yeah,
the way that you know it's working is number one, oh, I have no cravings. I'm not hungry anymore. And I have a lot of energy. If you're tired and you're craving, then all we know is you haven't done it correctly. You
yeah,
haven't got into ketosis. And sometimes you haven't, you need to do a little bit longer.
yeah.
But if you do it right, you should get in there and all of a sudden feel the benefits. And then it's going to be easier and easier and easier. Um, so that's pretty much what happens with that.
Yeah, and I think another point too is, most diabetics, right? They're on the diabetic cocktail, the blood sugar drug, the cholesterol drug, the high blood pressure medication, and they're not really aware of how much that depletes the body, right? Like they know about the side effects potentially, and they know that these aren't fixing anything. They're band-aids, right? That's unfortunate what these medications work as. But the electrolytes are vital, right? Especially like I live in Florida, and like if you don't have electrolytes with you, like you're going to deplete it some way, shape, or form. But the B vitamins, I think you bring up a great point. I mean, it's I think crucial for someone, and I learned that even way before. I mean, I think I learned that in high school, chemistry or nutrition, right? Like how important B vitamins are, and that our body gets depleted. So thank you for that input.
Think about especially with vitamin B1, the more
Yeah,
carbs that you eat, the higher the sugar, the more B1 that's needed to metabolize that sugar. And if you don't have enough, you end up with this very interesting symptom called peripheral neuropathy, where the
yeah,
nerves in your feet start dying and then you start getting tingling and things like that. So that's so one way to fix that is to take more B1, right?
yeah,
On the flip side, on the electrolytes, potassium, our requirements are literally like almost 5,000 milligrams a day.
yeah,
I mean, you would have to consume 7 to 10 cups of vegetables at least every day, and rarely does anyone do that. So they're usually deficient in potassium. Potassium is necessary for energy,
sure, yeah,
for so many different things, fluid control. And there's data to show that um, our ancestors way back in the day consumed 15,000 milligrams of potassium every single day.
yeah,
So I found with some people, especially with diabetes, if they beef up, no pun intended, the potassium, the kidneys are work better,
yeah,
the blood pressure works better, their blood glucose level is better,
yeah.
and they get rid of the fluid, and they don't retain as much sodium.
Yeah, and in full disclosure, I love your electrolytes. I use them. I think they're great. And I want to point out one thing too. I just a few months ago, I had a patient that was saying, "Hey, listen, I want to just get everything from food, right?" This was her philosophy and idea. So I gave her, for instance, on vitamin D, and I said, "Okay, well, you can certainly get vitamin D from food." But I looked at it and I calculated it based on eggs. And I said, well, if you could eat 1,600 eggs a week, I think you could do it nutritionally. Or I can get you a supplement that, probably make it a little bit easier. And she's like, 1,600 eggs. I was like, yeah, that's how many, that's how much you're going to need in order to get your vitamin D level to a sustainable amount. And I was like, we have the tools and the sophistication now in our natural healthcare that you can get supplements that are phenomenal. And I know the supplements you have are great. They're great quality. I use the electrolytes quite a bit, and they're great. And they taste really good too. I'm sure you've formulated it that way. So anyway,
Yeah. I mean that ideally it'd be the best is to try to get it from the food, but there's certain vitamins that are really hard, especially the vitamin D.
yeah,
Like I mean, it's in fatty fish, it's in eggs, but um, yeah, that's really hard to get it. You know, um, believe it or not, if we take a look at the one of the best foods for a diabetic to get the most nutrition, it's the exact food that they tell you to avoid, and that would
yeah,
be like the red meat.
right, yeah,
So you have the red meat, you have I mean, it has a lot of great protein. It's low
yeah,
carb,
yeah,
has iron, it has selenium, zinc.
yeah.
Um, so it's all the key things that are good to heal the body.
Yeah, and I saw a study once talking about, they were talking about how red meat caused a lot of problems. And the study actually really showed that the red meat wasn't really doing it, but it was the red meat mixed with like the gluten from the bread and the
Mhm.
tomato sauce from the burger. And when they isolate each thing, the red meat was actually fine. It was all the other stuff, right, that
Yeah.
created problems. It's just, I always look at it this way, and maybe I'm considered crazy, but in order to sell medication to people, they have to be sick. So as long as a society can remain unhealthy and sick and challenged in their health, well, you have a customer there always, right? And I always think like if someone could work really hard as they do when they meet you and they watch your videos and they get themselves into a natural health plan, I think that would be really ideal. So they can do things closer to eating well and taking care of themselves. I always think is a better idea to get themselves obviously improving and not just dependent upon a medication for the rest of their life in many cases. So
Unfortunately, the dietitian has a very large organization. They're the most influential over our food policy and what people eat in
mhm,
hospitals and university. And very unfortunately, they're highly controlled by. I mean, there's these all these cozy relationships between the dietitian, the continuing education that's sponsored
yeah,
by big pharma,
yeah,
big ag, and the ultra processed food industry. So this recent data that came out, I mean, that's a little bit of a conflict of interest, right? And
yeah.
here you are trying to get the right information, and you end up with the food pyramid, which is like, wait a second, this thing does not
Yeah.
work. Well, now we know why, because of these other relationships in the back room that you
Yeah,
don't
and at the
necessarily
golf
see.
course, right? The
Yeah.
CEO and the other CEO at a golf course putting a deal together so that the entire population eats a certain way, right?
Yeah,
The SAD,
unfortunately.
Standard American Diet, right? It's like, oh my
And
gosh.
then and then the consumer's confused because they're getting conflicting information.
Yeah,
Someone's telling them to do this, but you always have to really look at these hidden relationships with the so-called, mainstream diets and things like that.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Berg, I want to thank you for doing this interview. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to have your link and so forth underneath this particular video, but can you just let everybody know how to reach out to you and learn more about your approach and your philosophy? They're probably already followers since you have 11 million, but if there's anybody that's not a follower, could you just give us a little information about your page?
Yeah. The best thing is to go to drberg.com. And I just have a lot of resources there. I have a lot of videos and helpful
Mhm,
resources for someone to get on the right diet so they
mhm.
can get started. But I really am interested in explaining it in the simplest way possible so it doesn't make it confusing. And, something's better than nothing. So you don't have to do everything at once. You just have to get started immediately.
Absolutely. And is there a place when they get to this site that you would recommend someone new to check out? Is there
Yeah.
like a training
The,
area or your store? What do you
I
think would
think
be
the
best for someone?
best thing is just to click video. Okay.
Okay.
There's a tab on video and it says start here and watch that first video. And then it says second video. And then it says third video. So that way you kind of, you can just follow along to get the most important information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And hopefully we do another interview. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.